Chapter number 1 of the Chess Goals Queen's Indian course, and we're looking at d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3. James, what can you tell us about this chapter?
So this is the starting point of the Queen's Indian with the move knight f3. The main alternative would be knight c3 going into the Nimzo. And we're going to go ahead with b6. And we're officially now, Matt, in the Queen's Indian defense. This chapter focuses on the absolute main line, which is 4g3. This is what you will face maybe 40 to 50% of the time. It's White's absolute best try for an advantage, and one of only two tries White has that could perhaps claim some sort of small edge. What's White doing? Well, White's idea is we're going to have this bishop on the long diagonal. That's a really good piece. They just want to oppose bishops, and turns out that's actually White's just best strategy in the opening.
Yeah, and I've played some of these setups from the white side, so this will be a fun chapter, kind of talking about our different ideas from both perspectives.
Yes. Okay, so let's continue. So for bishop b7, I will note you can be more experimental with bishop a6. That is the main line for grandmasters. So why am I not recommending bishop a6? Well, there's two main reasons. One, there's significantly more theory, and I mean significantly more. The course would be twice as long to cover bishop a6, and I just don't think that's necessary at the club level. If you look at the scores in the club database, they're actually quite similar. There's nothing wrong with bishop b7. Bishop a6 is just an attempt to squeeze that tiny bit more out. The other reason I'm not recommending it is I really want the Queen's Indian to be, for the viewers, a catch-all defense that also covers the ready, so one knight f3, and the English one c4. But if you play the bishop a6 Queen's Indian, you can't use your Queen's Indian in those opening variations. You can only use the bishop b7 Queen's Indian defense to meet the ready and the English. And so for those reasons, you're just getting so much more mileage out of bishop b7. So we're jumping on the long diagonal, putting the bishop on its best square. White will play bishop g2, opposing, and now we play bishop e7. Very briefly, bishop b4 is the alternative, resulting in a trade of dark square bishops. I've tried both. In my experience, keeping the dark square bishops on just keeps the middle games a little bit more complex, and it's a little bit more fighting for black. So not too much else to say, just keeping the bishops on the board. Yeah. We do the next move, castles. Okay, so White will castle, we will castle, just continuing with rapid development. And we've reached the critical position of the Queen's Indian. So it's White to move on move 7. They have many options. In this chapter, Matt, we're covering 7 knight c3, which is the absolute main move by a landslide. And in next chapter, we'll look at move 7 alternatives. Towards the end of this chapter, we'll actually loop back and look at the move 6 knight c3, which mostly transposes to 7 knight c3, but doesn't have to. If White is playing a little bit fast and loose. And so we're going to show the viewers at the end of this chapter some punishes if White hasn't done their homework and doesn't stick to the exact mainline move order. So we can get to that in a moment. But in any event, we've got castles, castles, and now knight c3. And this is a good moment to talk about, like, critically, what is happening what are the themes of this chapter. White's idea, and it's very similar to the Nimzo, is White would like to play e4, and then they would like to expand with d5. And that means they're going to have a tremendous amount of space in the middle, and they're going to block out our prize bishop, our favorite piece in the opening. And if White can achieve all of that on good terms, White probably has an advantage. What we are trying to achieve is some combination of pawn breaks that equalize the space disadvantage. One very popular combination is c5, d5. We've seen that a lot in the Nimzo. There's also f5, a5, which gives you a very Dutch sort of classical Dutch sort of feel. And what I'm going to be advocating for in this chapter, Matt, is a pretty cutting edge approach that seems to have started cropping up in 2019. We're going to actually be going for F5, E5, and trying to control space in that way. But we'll look at that in a little bit, because they've just played knight c3, and we have a move that's going to seem a little bit weird if you've never seen the Queen's Indian before. So I'm not going to make you guess. We're actually going to play knight e4. And this is a very strange looking move, potentially self-pinning, because white can move their knight and pin us down the diagonal. So quite scary as well. But there's a couple of ideas. Firstly, we would like to just take their knight and double their pawns. That's a nice start. We would like to move our f pawn, and we would also like to exchange minor pieces. So a motif in the Queen's Indian is we have really good bishops. This knight's great. Our Queen's knight on poor old b8 can have trouble getting into the game. We have a bit of a superfluous knight situation, because typically we don't want to go to c6 and block our bishops. So typically what you'll see is d6, knight bd7, and then knight to f6. If we've got one too many knights, we want to. So for all these reasons, knight e4 is a very attractive move. It also occupies the e4 square, which makes e4 more difficult for white to play. They've got to trade a piece off to get that move in. Trading pieces off reduces the advantage white has from their space advantage. Now we'll look at a couple of move 8 options. We're going to go through the absolute club main line first. It's what you're going to see most of the time, and it turns out it's actually a very good move. It's actually just queen c2, adding pressure to our knight, which is now attacked twice. I don't know if f5 is a move. It might well be, I'm not sure. But the move I'm recommending is the very simple and top engine move and mainline move for, at this point, I think 5 decades. Just knight takes on c3. And now we reach a critical decision point for white. This is a good trade for us. Like I said, we've got a superfluous knight. It reduces the space advantage. And now white needs to make a decision. The main move here is queen takes c3. But we're going to look at queen takes c3, and that means that white's actually not contesting e4. So they're still some way away from playing e4. So that's good. It's buying us time. But what if they play b takes c3? Now the queen is still controlling e4. They're building up, a nice blob of pawns in the center. And there is a upcoming tactical threat, Matt. And I know I'm being cheeky and putting you on the spot, and you might not be prepared for this. But if we play a random nonsense move, do you see white's tactical threat? And I'm testing you not to be rude, but because this comes up, and there's very few tactical shots in the Queen's Indian, but we're starting with an important one. So what would we, if we played a6, what would white's move be?
I had to kind of flip my thinking and think about this from the white side, but I've played a lot of these structures. In knight g5, that's the move that jumps out at me. Threatening.
Absolutely correct, and absolutely crushing.
Yep.
So threatening mate in 1, which we can stop by taking the knight. Turns out that wasn't the real threat. They're going to take our undefended bishop on b7, and then they're actually going to take our rook as well. So yeah, we're losing there. So we need a move that addresses this. That is the idea of b takes c3, is to set up this one move cheapo. The problem is it's a one move cheapo, and now they've given themselves the doubled c pawns. So normally in the Queen's Indian, Matt, we don't have the Nimzo Indian doubled c pawns to play against strategically. Now we do. And so the engine absolutely hates white's position. They've gone from even to worse, because obviously if you can defend the threat, now black is just strategically better. So that's what we're going to see. There's a couple of ways to defend it. You can close the diagonal with f5, but I think there's actually a better move, often in our Nimzo Indian course, when we see these doubled pawns, we would look for the plan of knight c6, knight a5, bishop a6. We can actually carry out that plan here and play knight c6, because now if knight g5, we can just take it, and our bishop is not undefended because the knight is actually closing the diagonal. So knight c6 is a great move. It prevents the tactic, develops a piece we were having trouble developing, and now gives us a nice strategic plan of knight a5, which would defend our bishop as well, and then bishop a6 going after the pawn. So thoughts on that, Matt?
I really like the consistency you have here, James, between the Nimzo Indian course and this course because,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
I see these double pawns by white, and I'm just immediately thinking back to your Nimzo strategies. Like, we're going to put our pawns on d6, e5, knight a5, bishop a6, attack that pawn. It's just, it feels so natural once you
it
kind of
just
get used to
flows.
these structures. And for viewers of the course, the more and more of these positions you play in your games, like you're going to be doing this on autopilot. You're going to easily know how to attack those doubled c pawns. So I love it for black.
Yeah. So knight c6, great move to remember. White now normally does take some space with 10 e4. Might as well. You have got that. Your knight g5 doesn't work, but you can take some space. We can play d6, just going for that classic pawn structure we're going to see again and again throughout the course, preparing moves like queen d7 and preparing moves like e5 to take, fight some space in the center. Just a good move. I will mention that instead of 10 e4, also possible is this knight e5 move, attempting to exploit the pin down the diagonal, because our knight shouldn't be able to move, but a knight actually can move. We have one move, but it's enough. We do have knight a5 here. Bishops will trade. The knight will come to b7, and we'll just go just a little bit further so you can see how to unravel. Now e4. We would like to very much play d6 here and force the knight back, but that would blunder knight c6, winning our bishop. So we can actually prepare d6, Matt, by putting our knight back on a5, attacking c4, covering c6. And now when we play d6, this c4 pawn will hang. So black can very quickly get back the momentum. White should play a move like queen e2, defending c4, d6, and the knight will move back. And black is already a little bit better. We could continue with something like queen d7, queen c6, and just pile up on this pawn. White's pretty good. You also would have the option of something like rook c8, c5, and trying to go after the c pawn that way. So just covering those options. If we go back now to 10 e4, d6, white just develops another piece with bishop e3. It's the most common move. They can play other things. It's not particularly critical at this point in time. What I want to demonstrate is our plan. We'll play knight a5 and start going after this pawn. They can't liquidate with c5 because we just have so much control of the square. Defending the pawn with knight d2 and unveiling their bishop. We can actually just keep going after the pawn here. And if they go after our rook, we say, that's fine. I'm going to take your pawn. And the computer really loves this exchange sacrifice. It wouldn't be some material. I think everything I've ever shared with you, Matt, involves some sort of obscure exchange sacrifice. So I'm glad to start. It's my favorite thing in chess. So glad to start with one. And the reason we're going to exchange sacrifice here is manifold. Well, firstly, we're grabbing just a valuable pawn. If white does give up their light square bishop, we're going to have a blockade of these light squares. So we'll have a pawn, good spatial control, good active minor pieces, the bishop pair, just for an exchange. And the engine gives black a pretty significant advantage after the exchange sacrifice. So on paper, we're 1 point of material down. The engine says, despite that, we're about 1.5 points of material better in compensation. So enormous compensation for the exchange. I've actually had this in a online game and won very easily. So it's a very easy position to play as well, because if you look at the white rooks, they don't have easy ways into the position. The white rooks are actually fairly inactive here, whereas our bishops will be very active. So just a very nice position. And the last thing I'll say on this one, Matt, is if you can't remember the exchange sacrifice, or you're not an exchange sacrifice kind of guy or girl, you can just move your rook with rook c8, and you're still about a pawn better based on the doubled c pawns. There's no reason for white to have doubled their c pawns.
I like that. So we have two options here. Either you can play dynamic with the exchange sac, or you can play more solid with rook c8. One question I have is, in other lines, say we
Yeah.
get this type of position, but it's not exactly in this chapter of our course. Is it okay to kind of play on intuitions and just sack that exchange with that capture on a8 as long as we know we're winning c4 and getting
Oh
that?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The long term weakness of the, as long as you're getting like a pawn or some good squares, like I think you can't just exchange sacrifice in general for no other compensation.
Mm-hmm.
But if generally when we're doing it, we're getting at least a pawn and usually the bishop pair, and that's more than sufficient. And there are quite a lot of Petrosian games in the Queen's Indian where there's lots of exchange sacrifices, and that's where I actually found this idea. So, yeah, quite common to do it in the Queen's Indian.
Very nice. Okay, should we go back to move 9 where white played b takes c3? Does that sound good?
Yeah, if we go 9 queen takes c3,
Yep.
thank you very much. Okay, so for all the reasons why we've just seen b takes c3 not very good, queen takes c3 is the main move, just preventing the doubling of the pawns. But this also means that it's harder for white to organize e4 because the queen now is not looking at e4. Makes sense. d6. Okay, so I did and about sharing trade secrets in this video. And this is where we're going to get into all my home cooking. So you're welcome, everybody. This is what you should be paying for the course for. The main moves in this position are actually f5, transposing directly to a Dutch, or c5. Now, I will say c5 is overwhelmingly the main move. It does equalize on the spot, but the resulting positions are just super boring and very drawish. And I don't enjoy playing them, so I can't in good conscience recommend them to the viewers. I don't mind getting an even position, but I want to play some fighting chess. I want, if it's a draw because we both play really well, that's cool. If it's a draw
Yeah.
because there's just not a lot going on, that's so boring. And it's just both players trying not to blunder for 2 hours, and that's not particularly interesting to me. But when I was researching the course, Matt, I found there's this new approach players are playing to make the game a bit more fighting and sort of solve some of the problems that the f5 line has. The f5 line is considered the more fighting option out of f5 and c5 for obvious reasons, but it doesn't score particularly well. So I didn't want to recommend f5. That's clearly not the best move in the position. So the idea of d6 is just we're not actually. So the first point is we're not telling white are we going to play with f5 or c5 because d6 is flexible. We're going to just develop this knight and sort of see how white progresses. But what we're probably going to do is actually play queen e8 and then f5. And our idea is not to attack on the king side. So I really want to stress this. This is not f5 with the idea of launching a king side attack. The idea is we want to get in f5 and then e5, and then at that point we will have 2 pawns on our 4th rank. They will have 2 pawns on their 4th rank. We've equalized the space advantage, but there are still some dynamic imbalances that we can then play for. So that is our strategic goal. d6, develop the knight, queen e8, f5, and then play for e5. And the queen on e8, the reason why you put the queen on e8, when you play f5, this square becomes very weak and you have to worry about it being attacked. So we actually are defending it in advance with queen e8 so that if it gets attacked, we can just move our bishop and defend the square.
Yeah, this sounds good. I really like this setup, the d6, e5, f5. I think it's a nice attacking structure, even if it's not a kingside attack necessarily, just having that space.
It can
Um,
turn into that. I just don't want the viewer to think my goal every game is to go for checkmate.
yeah,
If your opponent gives you the chance, absolutely go for it. But it's I think the big takeaway, I think, in the Queen's Indian in general is they're very balanced positions, not dry. That balance doesn't mean there's no chess going on, but balanced in the sense that neither side has a lot of strategical weaknesses. So if your opponent has no weaknesses, you can't just whip up an attack out of nowhere and expect it to be successful because you have no weaknesses to exploit, and there's no reason why your attack should succeed. So where I see players going wrong very often is over pressing from an even position. So I just want to be clear, like we want to just get all our pieces out and play chess. Just because they have a pawn on f5 doesn't mean we're trying to checkmate our opponent necessarily. And now we're going to look at some other moves for them. I think I've got next queen c2. And this is just renewing the threat of knight g5. So now that we've already committed a pawn to d6, we can actually now meet this with f5. Why? Well, this is the setup we wanted to go for anyway. And if we're going for this particular setup, Matt, the knight really does belong on d7 and not c6, and that's because white did not double their c pawns. So the knight going to c6 just doesn't have the upside that it did previously, where it can target the pawn on c4. Now it wouldn't really, it would stop the one move threat, but then would be left with a misplaced knight. So we will play f5 and close the diagonal. Now knight g5 isn't threatening checkmate, basically. White can play d5. It's really their only chance to drum up some sort of play. And it's a move that we need to understand how to meet. We're going to play e5 and close the center. Now, this might seem a very unnatural move for new Queen's Indian players, but it will very quickly become the most natural move in the world because we're going to reposition this bishop onto one of these two diagonals, and it will be really, really good. But what the closing of the middle has done is given us this juicy c5 square. And now that the middle is closed, Matt, now we can attack on the king side because there's the closed center. We can attack on the flank. So white is giving us the red carpet treatment for that king side attack.
I like it. And I was kind of hoping that white would push that d pawn too, because we've
Oh
seen this
yeah,
structure before. When the white pawns are on d5 and c4, our pawns are on these dark squares. We can really target the square on c5. So this is a fun position, kingside attack and slowing down that c pawn by white.
yeah, it's pretty. Yeah, this is. They really shouldn't play like this. This is like the club main line, and it shows sort of just a lack of familiarity with the positions. You don't see title players play in this manner, but you are going to see, as a club player, this is probably what you'll see the most. I've had this a couple of times in games that we've talked about, Matt, and when I ask my opponent afterwards, well, why'd you do that? They always tell me, oh, well, it makes your bishop bad.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's absolutely not what's going on in the position. Our bishop is often going to be a key attacking piece on this diagonal. So we might see some of that. E4 might as well, taking more space. And now we just put our bishop on a better diagonal. Obviously, if they take, now we can recapture with tempo, and we've completely reinvigorated our bishop with no loss of time. They normally do take. We'll take back. They move their queen. Now knight d7, developing our last minor piece. And this is a good place to stop the main line. We've sort of covered off the general feel of a 4g3 Queen's Indian. This is something like this is typically how your normal club game will go. And from here, we do have pressure down the f file. I would really like to play a5. It has two purposes, Matt. One is slowing down their queenside play. Two is securing this c5 square for our knight. And we can look to now, at that point, having improved our minor pieces, develop a kingside attack. Computer likes black, gives black a very, very small advantage, but it's the main line of white's main try for an advantage, and we came out of it with a tiny edge. Pretty good.
Yeah, so I like your a5 idea, kind of blocking up the queen side or slowing down white's plan. And I also like that this important bishop on f5 cannot be attacked currently by the f3 knight. There's no easy way for white to attack it. Yeah, I see your plan. Queen e8, queen h5 too. That looks great.
Just some improving moves. And some final advice from a bloke that has played this for a few years and had to learn by trial by fire. Improve your damn pieces first. Improve your position to the maximum before you attack. If you just rush an attack, you're not going to have much success. Black should be able to improve more than white can here. So take advantage of that. Take your time to build up to the attack. Don't rush into the attack.
Yeah, like take that a5 move. If it's white's move and they play b4 before you play a5, you might be able to save 2 or 3 tempo MP by playing a5 first. Because of the rooks
Yeah.
down the a file, like it's just slowing white down. We go to 10 rook d1.
Yeah, do you mind putting it on the board for me?
Yep.
Thank you very much. So we looked at 10 queen c2, which is the main move in the position, but we'll look at some alternatives. And I'd say for these, Matt, this is not move by move critical stuff. This is more just to give the viewers a flavor of how middle games might look, because these are fairly non-forcing positions. So I don't want them to stress too much about, oh, they played rook d1 instead of this other bishop move. It's more to give you an idea of how to get your pieces out. So that's what we're talking about. Okay, so rook d1, we've talked about the plan. We'll develop our knight first. Queen c2, preparing e4. We can now play f5. Notice that they can't play knight g5 to attack our e6 pawn because we would just take it. And the queen can't easily attack our pawn on e6 either. So even though we now have a weakness, they can't attack it. So we are justified in playing f5 without preparation with queen e8. d5 again. In this exact position, with the knight already on d7, e5 is playable, but we actually have a better move, which is bishop f6. So I like to show these little details. Now, the key takeaway here, Matt, is that the knight is already on d7, which means that we can't meet bishop h3 with bishop c8 to contest the diagonal because the knight's blocking it temporarily. You actually can still play e5 and continue from there. The computer gives it around equal, but we actually have a try for an advantage here with bishop f6. And we're just going to gambit this pawn. It's very easy to get back because we can always just play like knight c5 and take it back, or put a queen here. And White can take the pawn, but they can't keep the pawn is the point I want to make. So we're not too worried about them taking it. And if they did take it, it would open back up our bishop and give us the e-file to go after their e-pawn. So we'd be pretty happy if they did take it, actually. So, and that is why I'm including this line. It's actually a really nice idea to know you can just gambit your e-pawn, knowing you'll not only get it back, but have a better position for having done so. So bishop f6, let's say they take. We can throw in this really nice move, bishop e4, gaining it time against the queen. And the reason you look for this move in the Queen's Indian, Matt, is strategically it's really nice if you can occupy e4 with a piece, because it makes it just that much harder for white to ever get in the pawn move e4. They're now going to have to start trading off pieces to get that key pawn move in. So we'll take our free tempo. They'll move their queen. Now we can move our knight, going back after this pawn. White obviously cannot defend the pawn. And if you look at how the position is transformed in the last few moves, very nice bishop, a bit drunk bishop, but still a nice piece. This is a very nice dark square bishop, and this knight is fantastic on c5. So we've really improved all of our minor pieces quite significantly, and white's just moved their queen a few times. So we're moving forward, good progress. Knight to d4 is the main move, offering the exchange of light square bishops, but also trying to hold on to this pawn. That makes sense to me. We can actually just take here. I will just say, look, you can just fully liquidate everything. You can play like bishop takes, king takes, queen e7, and then knight. That's fine. Like, everything is fine here, but technically strongest is actually bishop takes, at which point they'll take back with their queen, and now we can take back with our knight, gaining a valuable tempo. And that was the idea of bishop takes, is so that now the queen is drawn to a square. When the knight recaptures, we gain time. Queen has to move. Now we trade light square bishops, and we can immediately start pressing against the white king with the move f4, breaking open some lines. So who's better here? Well, black is obviously better. It's just a question of how much. It's between half a pawn to a pawn advantage already. In these highly simplified positions, I much prefer having the knight to the bishop in the endgame. I think it gives you a pretty good winning chances. I would also point out, well, their king is under attack, our king is not. This e-pawn can be a bit weak on the semi-open file. Their rook is biting on granite. It's not very active. And we have this dark square pawn formation that's very good against their bishop. So just a lot of like little advantages for black in this line.
Yeah, I think the king safety for white is what would concern me playing the white pieces. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, this knight, it's hopping all around, and the light bishop doesn't have any targets. One, I think, nice way to think about this pawn sacrifice on e6, we know it was a temporary sack, but when white played d5, the upside for us was we got control of the c5 square, right?
Yeah.
The downside was our bishop on b7 was temporarily bad. But then white takes on e6, and all of a sudden we get the best of everything. We have the active bishop on the long diagonal, and we control the c5 square. Like, it's just perfect, and we know we're getting the pawn back later. So shouldn't really ever be afraid of that sack on e6. All right, should we go to move 10 and look at queen d3 next?
Thank you. So this is a better try. So we covered this one in this order because it's really a better version of queen c2. Well, why is it a better version of queen c2? If we play f5, this queen can actually come to the e file and put direct pressure on our weak pawn, which is not an option they have from queen if the queen is on c2. So just a slightly more precise move, which we require a little bit of awareness to meet. We can still play f5. White's other idea of queen d3 is just to push e4, right? That makes sense. So we're just taking control of the e4 square, continuing to not allow them that freeing pawn move. So let's say they do attack our pawn. Okay. We actually have queen c8 here, defending like so. No problems. Let's say they play b4, take some more space. They can play other moves. It's not important. It's more, again, we're not focusing too much on the move by move. It's more about ideas. So we're defending with queen c8 when they put direct pressure. Now we can play bishop f6, putting this bishop on a better diagonal. We've got two monster bishops in the position now. Let's say they try and oppose. That makes sense. We can now play queen e8, defending directly, preparing knight d7. Previously, knight d7 would drop this. Sorry, knight d7 would drop this pawn. They improve their pieces. We develop our last minor piece, and this is a good spot to, we've got all of our pieces out. It's an even position. Our plan in the position is probably something like a5, then e5, at which point we should be completely equal.
And that's one of the better lines for white, I think, right? When they put the queen on d3. Yeah. But
white's played very well. Yeah.
If we know this idea, like, okay, we can play queen c8 first, guard the e pawn, bishop f6, then bring the queen to e8. You kind of have that idea in your mind. Then it's not too difficult. In the back of your mind, yeah.
Yeah. Because normally you're going to play queen e8, then f5, so none of this matters. But, sometimes move orders get switched up, right, and you can't do that. So now you know, oh, I've got a backup plan. I can also defend from c8. So it's all good if they can attack my e-pawn and I didn't prepare it in time. I got queen c8 as well.
So then we have one more move 10 to look at for white. Move 10 b3, looking for the fianchetto, but my instincts tell me this might not be as good as b4, because I'm thinking white might want to expand queenside. Is that true?
Want the space. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll put it this way. The center is not yet closed, so both sides should be looking to remain flexible. Once the center closes, we want to attack on the king side. They should be attacking on the queen side. So at the moment, it's a bit like the school dance where you want to ask someone to dance, but you don't want to make the first move, which is fine. But I think your instincts are exactly right, Matt, because, all right, b3 is very slightly more solid than b4, but is the b4 pawn really a weakness?
No.
Probably not. I'd probably rather just take the space. So I think b4 is probably, I think b4 is definitely slightly better. But people play a lot of b3. They don't play a lot of b4, and I think it's because they're being ultra solid, which is something I can relate to. So
So, so are you saying if you see b3 over the board, you're looking at your opponent, it's probably that kid from the school dance, the chess club nerd that wouldn't get out on the
yeah,
dance floor? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's a good chance. Yeah,
Okay.
if I were a betting man. But either way, b3 or b4, the idea is just to develop this dark square bishop to a good diagonal, because it doesn't actually have good squares on this diagonal. So it really does need to go on the long diagonal to have really any influence in the game. Um, we can just continue with our normal plan, Matt. Knight bd7, bishop b2, queen e8, preparing f5. Oh, are you able to put the next move on the board for me? Mine's frozen.
Oh yeah. So we had rook a to d1 or queen c2. Let's start rook a d1.
Cool. Rook a1, just developing another piece. We can now play f5. And we've now achieved our ideal setup. All of our pieces are developed, and we're sort of now entering middle game territory. So if this was another opening course, I would just stop here, give you an evaluation and say, well, black is equal. Go figure it out for yourselves. But it's chess goals. We go a little bit further and give you that middle game plan. So, but just to be clear, we are already equal. So e5, we've seen this before. It's a common way of them continuing. We can meet that with e5. e5 is just very rarely a good move because they have got this monster battery on the diagonal. But when they play d5, Matt, we can play e5, and what are these two pieces doing? So anyway, e5, knight bd2, just rerouting and preparing e4. We can play a5. You'll see this again. This f5, a5 combination is very strong. Their play, now that the center is closed, should be on the queen side. So this a5 move really slows them down. We're going to continue on the king side. So taking a moment to spending one move to potentially save 2 or 3 moves means that our attack should hit first. And I think this is where we're stopping the line with a even position. Some ways we can improve. So knight c5 is obvious and good. We want to put this bishop on a better diagonal. It'll probably come to c8, preparing to come out this way. The queen can often go to f7, and you can bring the other rook to e8. And you can look at moves like g5, bishop c8, f4, that sort of thing. But I would absolutely recommend including a5. Don't skip a5. You'd be surprised how much including this one move on the other side of the board gives you a much faster attack on the side of the board where you are attacking, just because it slows them down so much.
Yeah, I love including a5 from the black side. And this strategic pawn structure, the more you show it to us, James, just the more I like it. Like this
Oh yeah,
idea
this
of,
is fun. These games are fun to play.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is great. All right, so I'm going to back us up to move number 12. We just looked at rook a to d1 here. And now let's look
Yeah.
at queen c2 with the idea of preparing e4. I think I know what we're going to play here. What's our move?
You tell me, Matt. You're what would you play?
So I don't want to allow e4, and I think the thematic idea is to play f5, controlling this square twice.
Exactly. And there's no downside again because our queen is defending the square e6 in advance. I know I'm saying this a lot, but when we play f5, we are giving ourselves a weakness, and that comes with some responsibilities. So we just need to always be aware of our e6 pawn. Knight to e1, a little bit flashy, but this is just a way of trading bishops. But it's better than putting the knight actually on some of the other squares. So knight e1, trade. Now the knight's actually hoping to come back into the game via f4. where it's going to attack e6. So this is another line I've included because it's an important idea. Well, what do you do about knight f4 attacking e6? Well, we can actually play queen f7 defending. They'll develop, let's say they develop a rook. Doesn't matter which rook. They're going to just keep improving their position, right? We can now bring our other rook over, and we're preparing to play down this part of the board. E3, very solid. A5 again, just slowing down their eventual queenside counterplay. And from here, we have a plan, honestly, of something like G5, F4. You can also play something. I just like playing G5 so that the knight can't ever come into F4, taking space like that. You can improve with a move like maybe like knight F6, knight E4, then bishop F6 to contest the diagonal. The world is your oyster. Black is doing completely fine here. There's lots of ways to proceed. What do you not want to do? You don't want to just mindlessly attack. White hasn't made any big mistakes yet. There's no reason why a big attack would work. So just lunging forward is going to create weaknesses in our camp that white can then strategically exploit. So just continue to improve your position. Play your moves like A5, improve your minor pieces, take it slow, don't rush, and you've got a very promising strategic position.
Yeah, I like it again. Same structure, and you're keeping us consistent.
Well, Matt, you're gonna like the Queen's Indian because this is like every game in the main line.
So now I'm taking us back to move number 8. So we're going way back here. We just looked at Queen C2, so that's like half of our chapter. We have 3 more options though. We're gonna look at knight takes E4. That'll be 1 line. We're gonna look at pawn to D5. That's 1 line, and then we're gonna look at bishop to D2, which is an additional 4 lines. So what do you want to start with?
So we'll start with knight takes e4, which I think in the notes I called a coward's move, and I stand by that. This is just an attempt to enter an endgame, right, where everything gets exchanged off. That's the idea here. Obviously, we take back, what else? And now they usually follow up with knight e1, trading even more pieces. All right, well, that's a little bit annoying. So again, we've got nothing better than trading. They'll take back with their knight, which is better. It's better to take back with the knight than the king because it just gets the knight back into the game that little bit faster. We can now play d5. So I guess this is a good moment to talk about why we're playing d5, c5, and not f5, e5. As a general rule in the Nimzo Indian and the Queen's Indian, so again, building on that familiarity and the lessons we learned in course 1, your fastest route to an equal position is d5, c5. So if you can just get in d5, c5 without any drawbacks, you should just get in d5, c5 without any drawbacks. If we wanted to organize f5, e5, we would need to make some preparatory moves to do so. And it's not any better than just playing d5, c5 right away. White's slow play and spending all their moves to trade pieces, the time that's taken means we can just play d5, they can't push c5. So we'll just play d5, c5, and it's an even position. So yeah, that's the logic, and hopefully that is a good memory marker for the viewer. I'm including this queen a4 move. It's by far not the main move, but it's the only move that, according to the engine, gives white any pull in the position. Otherwise, white is even or slightly worse, which makes sense. They've spent a lot of time trading pieces off for some reason. So queen a4, and they're actually looking to put pressure on the c6 square. And we'll sort of see how that sort of plays out. What we can do here, firstly, is take, drawing the queen over. And then after they take, we can now break with c5. So we've achieved both of our desired pawn breaks, Matt. When these two pawns trade, black is at least equal. There's no reason for black to be worse here. We have basically just have a symmetrical position. So takes, more trades. That's what white's trying to do here. We can play knight d7 defending rather than trading, because if we take, that would develop their knight. They can pin us. We can unpin defending. They can develop a piece, we can develop a piece, and this is a good place to stop. So, bit of an annoying line. Like I said, bit of a cow. It's definitely a non-fighting choice for white. They're not trying to claim an advantage in the opening. And I think lines like this are what give the Queen's Indian a bit of a tarnished reputation because people see these positions and go, everything's going to trade off, it's just a draw. And while I will say, in all honesty, yes, the most likely outcome with precise play is a draw. At the club level, there's still so much play left in these positions. You can play all the way to the final king and pawn position. There are still winning chances. There still is room to outplay your opponent. It's just an even position. It doesn't mean it's a dead position.
Yep, I think that's a really good point. As long as you have some imbalances to play with, which we do, and also keep in mind that they had to find move 11a4, even press for the tiniest of advantages, which is a rare move. So yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
think it's like 4% of games. So, yeah.
yeah, not anything to worry about. All right, so should we look at move 8 d5 now, or would you like to look at bishop to d2?
Let's look at d5 because d2 is a great place to finish. There's some cool stuff in that one.
Okay.
Okay, so d5, trying to take space and trying to take advantage of our last move because when the knight was on f6, we were controlling d5. Our last move removed control of d5. So white, we talked about at the start of the video, Matt, they would like to play d5, take space, and blunt our bishop. That's a strategic goal for white, so they push forward. There is a problem with this move. What do you think that might be?
Um.
It's pretty. It's. Don't overthink it.
Okay.
What is it allowing?
Double pawns. Double pawns.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can just take. That's the problem.
I was looking to
And
try
that's
to win
that's
a pawn.
why. Yeah, no, nothing fancy. So takes. Now we have this long-term strategic goal to play against. We can put the bishop on the long diagonal, immediately going after the pawn. Knight d4 is an active way of defending because you don't want to defend passively, right? So improving the piece. Now we can play e5, driving the knight away. D6. And now we have this structure, Matt, this dream Nimzo Indian structure against these pawns. Whose bishop is worse? I'll let you know. It's definitely their bishop because our bishop's just going to come to c8 and take this knight.
Nice. Yep.
Yeah. So e4, cementing the knight. We can play knight a6. We talked in the last course. Knight a6 is a great move just to be aware of. It's part of why I wanted to include this line. Got this juicy c5 square. The knight goes to a6 and not d7 so that in a single move we can put the bishop here to take. We don't have to rush to do so. And it's the same number of moves to come to c5. So knight a6 just makes us a little bit more flexible than knight d7 would because that knight d7 commits us to having to play knight c5 before we can reroute the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a good place to stop. I'm fairly confident the engine gives a pretty decent advantage here for black. We don't even have to trade off for the knight. We can actually just play bishop c8 and then g6, kicking the knight away, drop the bishop back to g7, and then break with f5. Just a great position. And who's got the long-term weaknesses? It's definitely white.
One question I have is, are there cases here where you would put the bishop on a6 still, or are we always looking to go to c8?
No, it's just to be flexible. Both are good. In this exact position, there's nothing wrong with bishop a6 either. They're going to have to commit something to defending it. And that might actually be better here. I'm just thinking, like, I know I said, oh, I'm happy just to put the bishop on c8 and trade, but I don't need to do that. I can just play g6. So let's remain flexible. I'm not 100% committed to bishop c8 here. You've got both options, and they give you a slightly different feel. I guess what I would say is if you want to play more strategically, you could probably go with bishop a6 and just focus on trying to win this pawn. If you want to play for that kingside attack, the bishop probably belongs on c8 where it can reinforce. So it's more about how do you want to handle the position? Do you want to attack or do you want to play strategically?
Okay. Yeah, and I think that, the bishop c8 is more tempting to me because if I'm playing the white side here, if black was going, knight c5, bishop a6, if white spends a move to defend the c pawn, maybe they get something going king side. So I can
Yeah.
kind of see the pros and cons of both, but I think bishop c8 does make more sense, kind of on
I
average.
think the problem, honestly, is after bishop a6, they can defend, and then you can't quickly add another attacker to
Yeah, you're stuck.
c4.
Yeah,
So it doesn't really go much further than that. So I think the kingside attack and getting the initiative going there is better. And the other thing is, we say this all the time in the Nimzo course, those weak c pawns are there for the rest of the game. We can come back and win them later.
I like it. I like it.
So we can finish off now with 8 bishop d2. Now, this is a great move. This is the master. This is what grandmasters play. Why? Well, we've seen everything else, and it ain't going anywhere good for white. It's not. There's no advantage to be claimed. So what do? They just develop another piece. They stick to their opening principles. Great move. Bishop d2 exclamation point. And one point I would note is we often saw in a lot of these other variations, this bishop doesn't have a great home, so they don't actually mind if we take it. Is I guess another point to make. It's not a particularly valuable dark square bishop. Uh, so in this position, because we're now getting into like, all right, I give you a lot of the stuff at the start of the video that you need to know because it's what COD players play, and now I'm giving you the stuff that I need you to, that you should know in case someone books up for you. So we're getting into that part of the video, Matt. The best move, in my opinion, is bishop f6. Just improving our minor pieces. This bishop looks really nice on the long diagonal. Just improving the minor piece. On e7, the bishop wasn't very active. Now that the f6 square is free, the bishop's very active. So just improving a piece. Our goal is still d6, knight d7. And can you...
Oh yeah, so here we have a branching point.
We'll start with bishop e1.
Okay.
So this was the main line for a long time, but it's fallen out of favor. And white's idea is, well, I want to improve my bishop, but I also don't want to give up the bishop pair, so I'm going to tuck it away. This is very slow. And as you can imagine, that is the drawback. Very slow, and that's why it's not the main line anymore. And we have a pretty nice sequence here that just equalizes immediately. So you can play knight takes c3. They have to take back with the bishop. So now they've just lost a lot of time. We can play bishop e4. Why do we put the bishop on e4? Their best move, if it was white to move, would be queen c2, preparing e4. Now they can't play queen c2. So this bishop e4 move is really, really nice. Now to get rid of the bishop, they're going to have to move this knight, which means they lose their light square bishop. Another set of minor pieces has been traded off. So the space advantage is getting less and less and less relevant. Rook c1 is just a good developing move. Again, they can play other moves. It's not that important. I just want to show the viewer how you develop your pieces. So d6, not d5. So d5 is a move, but d6 because we want to stick to that same structure we've seen again and again and again, Matt. The knight's going to come to d7. And the great thing about the d6 move instead of the d5 move, we have no weaknesses, which is very nice. So queen a4, probing the queen side. There are very few games in this position, but queen a4 has been tried by 2 grandmasters. Again, the queen couldn't go to c2, so they just put it actively to connect rooks. And now we can just play queen e8, just offering the queen trade. We would be quite happy with the queen trade. And this is a good place to stop. Even position. If they take with the queen, we can take back with the rook. And in that position, just to be clear, I would start with a5 to, again, slow down this queenside play before I played knight d7. So we've got plenty of time just to play slowly and positionally. There's no rush to get this knight on an active square. So after they trade, rook takes, a5. We can even look at something like g6 so that this bishop can drop back to g7. We can maybe play f5 in the future, take some more space, and the knight's going to come to d7 at some point. So just a very harmonious middle game position. No challenges for black.
And I kind of like how after bishop e1, we highlighted how modern chess really values the speed of development. We took advantage of
Yeah,
that by take c3 and then this bishop e4 move. So where do you want to go
yeah.
next? Do you want to look at...
We'll go to 9 queen c2.
Okay.
So bishop f6, now queen c2. So I don't know if you have this in America, but we have and I think it is an international song called the Hokey Pokey. You know the Hokey
Yeah,
Pokey?
I've
You
heard of
put your
that one.
left
Yep.
hand in,
Yep.
take your left hand out. Yeah.
Yep.
So that's what this line is, where White could have played like this without including bishop d2. So why did you include bishop d2? Because now they're forcing us to take, but they've given us an additional option. If they played queen c2 earlier, we could only take the knight on c3. Well, now we can take the bishop. So we're going to take the bishop and just get the bishop pair.
I like it.
But this is a popular way for white to play now. So anyway, take the bishop. I'll take back, losing more time with the queen, by the way, and now d6, and we get our familiar pawn formation. E4, they can take space. Now, I wanted to include this line because we're getting into a situation where we have the bishop pair, but they have the big center, and these positions can be difficult to play from the black side if you don't know the plans. If you do know the plans, they're actually really good for black. So we're going to show you the plan. Knight d7, we need to control this e5 pawn break. That could be potentially a problem. So now we've got 3 pieces on it. They improve their rook. And now g6. So this is why we're including this line. We're really in middle game territory now, but I want to show you how to keep improving your pieces. The idea here is actually just bishop g7, getting the bishop out of the way of e5, because if they play e5, we don't necessarily want to have to take. And this also increases our king safety and improves our bishop. So g6, they improve their other rook. And if I told you now, Matt, white is basically, all of white's pieces are about as good as they can be. That's my claim. What I would also claim is black actually has a lot of room to continue improving their pieces. So we still have bishop g7, we have queen e7, and then we can move our rooks. And what we actually see in the game database from this position is white starts to run out of good moves. Black has lots of good moves. And so patience. It looks really scary, but our looks can be deceiving. So let's go a little bit further.
And
Bishop g7. Oh, you go, Matt.
I
Sorry.
will say, like, club players, I mean, chess players in general have a lot of trouble being patient and just like not doing
Yeah.
anything too committal. So I could totally see people as from the white side here playing d5. Can I play e5? Can I play h4, b4? Like they might make their own weaknesses coming up.
Yeah. And black can do it as well. I've definitely done it from the black side as well, where it's like, oh, white's got this big attack coming. I need to play fast.
Yeah.
You actually don't. And that's the key takeaway. You've got time here. Any break white plays is going to be good for us. Why? Well, it's going to open up the middle and we have the 2 bishops.
This is, yeah, a bit of a
So,
tangent, but sometimes for practice, I play queen odds games. So I have a
yeah,
chess.com account where I only play queen odds. Like I just give up my queen and then play standard blitz.
yeah.
One of the best
That's
strategies is to set up just like this as the side without the queen. You want the 2 bishops, long diagonals, very flexible, and then work around the pawn structures. I mean, this reminds me exactly of those positions.
and you're not even down a queen. So
Right, and
it's
yeah, you're
pretty
not
good.
down a queen. Right, that's
Yeah.
even better.
So now they should play a move like h4, just taking more space. I'm not going to cover every single possibility here. What I can tell you is that they're all fine. Something for the viewers to play around with and just get more familiar with how they can play out. Queen e7. I really just want you to see where all the pieces go. So queen e7, where it supports both the e5 pawn break or the c5 pawn break, connects the rooks. And this is where we can stop. This is an even position. All we need to do, because again, white can't continue to improve their minor pieces. We can look at playing a move like a6 to stop knight b5. We can then put the rooks on central squares, and then we can play c5 or we can play e5. So we've still got a lot of moves left to keep improving our position. White's kind of maxed out. All they can do is break in the middle, and all of those breaks are fine for us.
Yeah, this flexibility I think is extremely important at the club level. You know,
Flexibility and patience.
yes, yes. Your opponents will make unforced errors. Tennis
So we'll
terminology.
go. Could we put 9 rook c1 on the board, please?
Yeah. Back here. So we did
Thank you
queen
so
c2.
much.
Let's look at rook c1. All right.
All right, just another interesting developing option. So we'll move through it quickly just to give you a different flavor for a different sort of middle game position. d6, we're going to do the same thing again. Now d5. Um, let's see, so in this sort of position, what we want to do is actually mass exchange pieces and play e5. But if we're going to play e5, we'd prefer not to end up with this bishop stuck behind our e pawn, where we'd have a kind of like a bad King's Indian bishop. We don't want to. We want to have the benefits of the pawn on e5, but no bad bishop.
Hmm.
But we can actually play now knight takes c3 with an attack on the queen. So they've got to recapture with a piece. They I mean, they could recapture with a pawn, but then they got the doubled c pawns for some reason, which would give us something to play against there anyway. So they're not going to recapture with the rook and lose the exchange. So they're going to capture with the bishop. Bishop takes, bishop takes. Now the rook takes, and now we can play e5. And again, we're seeing the contours of familiar middle game positions, Matt. We're going to have knight d7, we're going to have a5, and we're going to have f5. e4, knight d7, b4, good move, getting in some space on the queen side before we can get in a5. Very good move. a5 anyway. If they take, we can take with the rook and have pressure against this backwards pawn. So a5 is still good. It would have been better if we could get it in before d4, but white's playing very well. a3, we can take and have the control of the a file for now. In e7, connecting rooks, and this is a good place to stop. Again, we have an even position, and there are two obvious plans we have. One is g6 f5, in which case you want to leave the rook on the f8 square and trying to break here, or you can actually play rook a2 and the other rook over to a8 and try and invade on the a file, because playing there, it's very difficult for white to get this rook into play, and these two minor pieces are not going to be in the relevant theatre of operations over on this side of the board. So you can handle the position either way. It's to choice.
Yeah, I like this too. And I love the end game grinds. Like end games with
Yeah.
imbalances to play with, just like this position, are awesome. Now,
Yeah. So again,
yeah.
even but not dead.
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's a
I
lot
think
of
we got
play.
995. Okay. So this just forces simplifications, and that's okay. So knight takes c3 or knight takes d2, doesn't really matter. I slightly prefer knight. Actually, it does matter. Sorry. In this position, it does matter, which is why I've included it. When we take on c3, it's attacking the queen. If we take on d2, it's not attacking the queen, and they can actually take our bishop, then take our rook in the corner. So um, something I probably could have made more of a big deal out of earlier is one of the reasons knight e4 works, like knight c3, knight e4 works, is even if they pin us, when we take on c3, it attacks the queen. So we can always unpin tactically. So that's why in this position, yeah, it's knight takes c3, knight takes c3, bishop takes, king takes. We can now just play c5. So again, we've talked about if they just let you play c5, d5, you should. Well, they've let us play c5, d5, so we're going to. Takes, pawn takes. This is a very good structure for us. They don't have to take, but I wanted to include something a little bit different, again, to give the viewers a different middle game plan, a different flavor. They could play something boring like e3, and then we'll just play d5, right? So that's not very interesting. Let's say they take. We take back. Now, structurally, this is very good for us, but we do have this backwards pawn that they can apply pressure to. So let's see how we defend this pawn and turn this position into a good position. Queen d6. Great move. Blockading the pawn and preparing to put more pressure with the rooks. We can play queen b6. now this, there are other ways to defend, but this works really well. Now, if the queen takes, we can take back with the pawn. We got the a file pressure, and our pawn is no longer blockaded. That's really good. So they normally reinforce their queen. We can now play captures, and bishop e7, taking back control of the d6 square, driving them away. Notice there's nowhere the rook can go on the 6th rank, so the rook must go backwards. So d2, preparing to double. We can now play d6, forcing the knight away. And notice this all just works. Because we've left the knight on b8, the knight can't come into c6. The knight's got to go back. At that point in time, we've got knight c6, and they can't put enough pressure on this pawn. Like doubling the rooks against the pawn that's defended by the bishop is just no good. So we're going to have knight c6. We're going to have pressure on the queen side. We can push this pawn down the board, try and create a long-term weakness. And this knight will come from c6 into d4 or b4, depending on how the game proceeds. But again, just a even middle game grind.
Yeah, so another endgame position. I think, we're going to find that people will post some of their games in our Discord server and say, hey, look at this endgame I had out of a Queen's Indian. Engine said 0.0 or 0.1, minus 0.1, but look at this endgame technique. And I'm hopeful that we can start to share more of those examples down the road too.
Yeah, I will say this. These are all even positions we've talked about, but I score this is White's absolute best try in all of the Queen's Indian. And I score about 60%. And just because I've got more experience, and that's got to count for a lot, right? The plans and the ideas. We've given White a lot of the best moves in this chapter, but your opponents are going to not always find the best moves or know the best plans. And very commonly when I played this in classical tournaments, I start the game with a 20, 30-minute time advantage because I can just bang out all these moves. I know all the plans, and they don't. I played an FM who knew I think 6 moves of theory, and by move 10, I had a significantly better position.
That's awesome. And what's funny too? In our dynamic Slav course and in the Benko courses, the best lines for White will be 0.5 or 0.7 evals from the White side, right? So it's we're playing very solid here, getting endgames with a lot of play when White plays best moves. I think that's very promising.
All right.
Move 6.
I got 2 takeaways. 1, be patient. 2, try and be flexible.
Great takeaways. 6, knight c3. Should we circle back and look at these 3 lines?
Yep. Okay. So very quickly, this mostly transposes back into the main line, but it doesn't have to. We will play. Oh, sorry. So 6, knight c3. White is changing up the move order, right? And we'll see if does it actually make a difference. I'm recommending we just castle and allow White to castle, in which case we've just fully transposed back to the main line. But let's say they don't. Well, they've got some options. One is d5, and we can punish this attempt by playing bishop b4 and just preparing to take on the knight, which will undermine this advanced pawn. Can you put the next move on the board for me? It's freezing.
Okay, so we have castle or bishop d2.
Castles, please.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you. So castles, just allowing the doubling of pawns. This is most common. And again, we see this weakened pawn structure that we can play against in the future. And now d6, just cementing the c5 square. We're not at all worried about d takes on e6. Not only can we take back immediately and have the open f file, but it would open up our bishop. So that's probably not going to see that. So knight d4 going active makes the most sense. It's not like they have a lot of other moves. There's not a good square for this dark square bishop just now. So improving the knight first makes sense. Increasing the pressure on e6. e5. We don't have a dark square bishop, so we're very happy to go into this dark square pawn strategy. Knight moves again. We've seen similar positions already in this chapter. Bishop c8. I think, again, generally the best square for the bishop, because with the pawn already on d5, we don't have knight c6, knight a5, so it's very hard for us to put enough pressure on this pawn to win it. e4, knight a6 we've seen again coming into the juicy c5 square, and that's a good place to end it. Just a very comfortable position for black. Good winning chances here, and we can play something like g6 to force the knight away.
Those double pawns are so ugly for white. Just the
Yeah, like why give them to it? Like why give, like, because it's a strategically very even middle game, right? And then white just gives you something to play against for, like, it's like an unforced error.
yeah.
So we'll go back. So let's not do that. Instead of castling, they can play bishop d2, preventing the doubled pawns. Here, I actually like taking anyway. We're not getting the doubled pawns, but what we are going to do is start liquidating. And we have this knight e4 move, and the bishop has nowhere to go. So queen c2, forcing the trade. We can now play d6, and we're going to continue with e5. Castles, e5, e4, a5. The knight can move, wanting to come into some of these squares, or preparing f4. Bishop c8, improving our minor piece. Just an even position again. So it's why I've gone through, like, we're seeing a lot of the same moves now and a lot of the same ideas, but it just highlighting, I guess we've got to a very similar sort of end point, but by a very different means. And we're playing the same sort of moves over and over. So what would I do from here? Well, obviously knight a6, knight c5, and then I'm probably just going to break with something like g6, f5.
And we have that nice sort of V formation again with the pawns. And one
Yeah,
thing that really stands out to me here is that bishop on g2. I've played these structures from the white side. I really don't like that bishop on g2 with these pawns stuck on the light squares for white. So even though the engine's saying
yeah,
close to equal, I don't like white's position here very much.
yeah. It's hard to play, and black, like in a lot of these positions, black outscores white, not because white's position is bad, but simply because white's position is harder to play.
Yes. Yep, that's a great way to put it. So one line left, move 7, queen c2. I think that's right here, isn't it? We had d5 and now queen c2.
Yeah, queen c2. Yep. So the idea here is white would like to. So in the main line, like castles, they have we have knight e4.
Yeah.
So what they're trying to do, right, is very sneaky. They're taking control of e4 before they castle, so that we can't continue into the main line. Very sneaky. Let's c5. So the problem, the drawback, and we'll see this a lot in actually our next chapter, the move 7 alternatives, because it comes up a lot there, is when the queen vacates d1, white can't threaten to push d5 anymore. So there is a big drawback to the queen stepping off the d file. It means that when we play c5, they can't play d5. So they stepped off the file, Matt. So we're just going to hit them with c5, and now we're just equal. And for no reason have they allowed us to equalize. So let's say they try and push. Now they shouldn't, but let's say they do. That's I guess the critical test, you might say. Can they just push anyway?
Yeah.
Well, takes. They can now try to make the position work with this pin, because obviously if we take or push, our bishop is hanging. Knight c6, breaking the pin. We've seen this idea before. Pawn takes. But now we can exploit the position of the queen with knight d4, jumping into the middle, forcing the queen to move. Now we can reroute this knight, attacking their knight, forcing it to move, takes. Now we can occupy the d6 square. Their castle, we can move to e5. So now our bishop's improved a lot. And we've already got at least even position with really no complaints. We can continue with something like d6 or knight d6. This is a Benoni structure, so something I know you're familiar with, Matt. I guess in the Benoni we would have g6 and bishop on g7, but the bishop's on the long diagonal, right?
Yeah.
The fianchetto Benoni is known not to be the most critical test of the Benoni. It's just solid for white, but it's a Benoni. So I've included this because if you're a Queen's Indian player, it may not be obvious what black's plan is here. After the move d6, our plan is actually a6, b5, like just expanding on the queen side. That's where we have a pawn majority. I count 1, 2, 3 versus 1, 2. So our long-term goal is to create a passed pawn on the queen side and hopefully force them to give up a piece for it. Their strategy is actually a king side attack, and that's going to be hard to generate here.
Yeah, I like this, Benoni. Your queenside plan looks great. So that was line 16, James, out of 16. What are your final thoughts on this chapter 1?
Yeah, I already gave them, and I forgot we had to circle back. Sorry, I got too excited and went early. The Queen's Indian main line rewards two things above all else: patience and flexibility. I think there is a bit of a steep learning curve in the Queen's Indian, not because the moves are difficult or because the positions are particularly sharp, but because you have to learn patience. And your results will massively improve once you become patient and understand, hey, look, a lot of these positions are even. I can't just attack them, or I can't just try and win a pawn from out of nowhere. My opponent has no weaknesses. I just need to keep improving my position and see what comes.
Great summary. All right, so that ends chapter 1. We will see you guys in chapter 2. Be patient. Wait for the end of this video in 3, 2,